I'm Camila, I'm an art teacher at Acera, and I would love to share with you my philosophy of teaching, and we're gonna see it through an elective that I'm currently doing with middle school. So something I like doing in my classes is finding a balance between freedom and constraints, and the constraints aspect is usually either a technical constraint or a conceptual one. So for example, in this elective, it's called Inside the Creator's Notebook. It's essentially an elective for learning how to draw using perspective and how to understand and produce technical drawings as well. So an example of a constraint that was technical was, okay, so we're going to design a shape that has no curves and no angles, and is essentially based of a Rubik's Cube. So with the Rubik's Cube example, the technical constraint was you can only work with a 3x3x3 cube, and you will be taking smaller cubes out of it, as many as you want, as long as the thing could physically exist and stand, but you may not add to it. So that was very specific. They all look very different, even though that happened, and we also had kids who were not sitting together coming up with the same vision. And then an example for something that's more conceptual would be at the end of that unit, when we had already also learned about one vanishing point perspective. The goal was, I will need you guys to build a place or a structure that is seeing in this vision of one vanishing point perspective. So some people might do an indoor space, some people might do an outdoor space, some people might do something that exists or not. So in that regard, the technical constraint isn't so specific. It's more like, now that you know to varying degrees of how to apply this, what would you make that you haven't been able to make before? When I teach art, especially at this school, one thing that I like thinking about and I share with the students is, if you guys are taking my class, there's something of value that I am bringing you. There's some kind of growth that needs to be happening. So in that regard, if the student is pushing for something in a way that I know this is something they could do just at home, they don't need the school context, they don't need the classmate context, and they don't need the teacher context, then I kind of push back on that, and I tell them why. Like I say, this is something you could do at home right now. So how do we do it in school so that you're being pushed further in some way, and so that I can give you feedback that's useful to you in some way. Another thing that I really care about when I teach art is I want them to understand that not everyone wants to do art just for the sake of it. Some people do, for sure, but there's a lot of skills that you acquire when you take an art class that can be applied to other jobs in the future, more maybe industry related jobs or even science related jobs. And I always make room for them to understand it's not just about wanting to talk about the world or expressing your feelings. That sometimes you just really need people with a specific skill that can be applied to other things. So I try to bring all that in, so that I guess a little to dispel the idea that art is just like it can be whatever you want it to be, and also just like help them understand that it's not just something that is completely subjective. Some feelings about art are subjective, but there's very specific objective things to talk about and to acquire and do well in art that I think they should be learning.